Captain Amy Rodriguez brought her exploration ship out of hyperspace near the asteroid belt, where Jake and his team had established their hidden base. She had been traveling in deep space for 8 months when the evacuation order reached her ship. By the time she returned to known space, humanity was already gone and the galaxy was at war. Amy's crew of 12 explorers had valuable information about what they had seen beyond the outer rim. Her ship had been mapping unexplored systems when they detected massive energy signatures coming from the galactic edge. The readings were unlike anything in their databases. Something enormous was happening in the region where humanity had disappeared. Lisa worked frantically to decode more precursor warnings as Amy shared her data. The energy signatures matched descriptions in the ancient texts of something called the Devourers. These entities consumed entire civilizations by turning them against themselves. They did not need weapons or ships because they made their enemies destroy each other. Jake realized that the pattern was already happening in their galaxy. The wars that had broken out after humanity left were not normal conflicts. Species that had lived in peace for decades were suddenly fighting over old grudges. The violence was spreading faster than it should have been spreading naturally. Rex studied tactical reports from across the galaxy and found the same disturbing pattern. Military leaders were making irrational decisions that hurt their own people. Trade negotiations were failing because both sides refused to compromise on simple issues. Even the most peaceful species were becoming aggressive and paranoid. The group now numbered 55 humans, including Amy's crew. They represented a tiny fraction of their species, but they carried knowledge that could save billions of lives. The precursor warnings made it clear that the Devourers had destroyed civilizations much more advanced than anything in the current. Galaxy Ben analyzed the psychological warfare tactics described in the ancient texts. The Devourers sent scouts ahead of their main force to weaken their targets. These scouts were not physical beings, but some kind of mental influence that spread madness and hatred between different groups. The stronger the civilization, the more they turned their own strength against themselves. Amy reported that her ship had intercepted strange transmissions from beyond the galactic rim. The signals were coded in human military encryption, but the content was disturbing. Humanity was fighting a massive space battle against an enemy that existed partially outside normal dimensions. The battle had been going on for months with no clear winner. Lisa made a breakthrough when she combined precursor data with the new information from Amy's ship. The Devourers followed a predictable cycle. First, they sent psychological attacks to create chaos. Then they waited for civilizations to weaken themselves through internal conflict. Finally, they arrived to consume what remained of their victims. Humanity had recognized this pattern and left the galaxy to strike at the source. They were trying to stop the Devourers before the main invasion could begin. But the psychological attacks had already started affecting other species. The wars and conflicts were not accidents, but the first stage of an alien assault. Jake called a meeting of the remaining humans to decide their next course of action. Some wanted to find a way to join the battle beyond the rim and help their species fight the Devourers. Others argued they should stay and try to protect the galaxy from the psychological attacks that were already spreading. Captain Zethkar arrived at their asteroid base with disturbing news from the Galactic Council. Several alien species had formed, a coalition to hunt down the remaining humans. They blamed humanity for abandoning the galaxy and wanted revenge. The humans were now seen as both the cause of galactic chaos and the only hope for ending it. The Krillian Empire had declared that any humans found in their territory would be captured and executed. The Altarian Federation wanted to force the humans to call their species back from beyond the rim. Even former human allies were turning against them as desperation and fear spread throughout the galaxy. Amy suggested they use hidden human weapons caches to defend themselves, but Lisa disagreed. Fighting other species would only prove that humans were as violent and dangerous as their enemies claimed. They needed to find a way to help without making the situation worse. Rex discovered that human colonies had left behind automated defense systems that were still functioning. These systems were programmed to protect any species that worked toward galactic peace. It seemed humanity had planned for the possibility that other races would need help after they were gone. The defense systems included advanced weapons that could stop Krillian warships and shield generators that could protect peaceful colonies from attack. but the technology would only activate if the requesting species proved they were genuinely trying to maintain peace rather than gain power. Ben realized that the psychological influence of the Devourers was affecting the human hunters as well. Species that had worked with humans for generations were suddenly consumed with hatred and blame. The alien coalition was not making rational decisions but responding to external mental manipulation. Jake made a difficult decision to reveal their location to Chancellor Vexthera and other moderate leaders. He sent a message explaining about the Devourers and offering to help fight the psychological attacks. It was a dangerous risk because it might expose them to their enemies. Vexthera responded with mixed emotions. She was relieved to know that some humans remained in the galaxy, but angry that they had hidden instead of helping immediately. The Altarian leader agreed to meet secretly to discuss what could be done to stop the spreading chaos. Lisa prepared a presentation showing all the evidence they had gathered about the Devourer threat. The psychological attacks were subtle, but followed clear patterns. Species affected by the influence became more aggressive, paranoid, and unwilling to cooperate with former allies. The madness was spreading like a virus through diplomatic and trade networks. Amy volunteered to lead a reconnaissance mission to the Galactic Rim to gather more information about the battle humanity was fighting. Her ship was fast and well-equipped for exploration. If the main human fleet needed supplies or reinforcements, they had to know what was required. The remaining humans faced their greatest challenge yet. They were hunted by aliens who blamed them for the galaxy's problems. They were cut off from their own species who were fighting a desperate battle in unknown space, and they were trying to save civilizations that did not want to be saved. But they had something the Devourers had not expected. They understood how the psychological attacks worked, and they knew how to fight back. The ancient precursor warnings had given them weapons that could protect minds as well as bodies. They just had to figure out how to use them before the galaxy tore itself apart. The Krillian warships moved through space like hungry predators. Admiral Korthak watched the Scythian colonies burn on his view screen and felt satisfaction for the first time in decades. For too long, the humans had stopped his people from expanding their empire. Now nothing stood in their way. The Scythians sent desperate pleas for help to the Galactic Council, but no species wanted to risk fighting the Krillians alone. Without human backup, every race was focused on protecting their own territory. The council meetings became shouting matches between scared leaders who could not agree on anything. Jake wiped dust from another precursor stone tablet while Lisa worked on translating the symbols they had found. 2 weeks had passed since they learned about the wars breaking out across the galaxy. Their small research station felt very lonely, knowing they might be some of the last humans in known space. The communication system crackled to life with an incoming signal. Jake rushed to answer it, hoping for news from other humans. The voice that came through was speaking English with an American accent. Commander Rex Chen introduced himself as the captain of the USS Endeavor, a colony ship that had been traveling in deep space for over a century. Rex explained that his ship had been on a long mission to establish a new human settlement beyond the Outer Rim. They had only recently returned to find the galaxy changed and their species gone. His crew of 40 people were confused and scared. They did not understand why humanity had abandoned everything they had built. Lisa felt relief wash over her when she realized they were not alone anymore. She and Jake quickly shared what they had learned about the evacuation and the mysterious coordinates. Rex listened carefully as they described the precursor ruins and the warnings they were trying to decode. The 3 humans worked together to piece together what had happened. The automated message from Jupiter Station was their only clue about why humanity had left. Something beyond the galactic rim had made the entire species drop everything and rush toward danger. It was not like humans to run away from problems. Rex brought his ship to orbit around Kepler 442b and joined the archaeological work. His crew included engineers and scientists who could help analyze the precursor technology. Together, they made faster progress understanding the ancient warnings than Jake and Lisa had made alone. The crystal storage devices contained images of battles fought millions of years ago. The precursors seemed to be fighting against something that came from outside normal space. The enemy was shown as dark shapes that consumed entire star systems. The warnings pointed toward the edge of the galaxy and used symbols that meant danger. and death. While the humans worked on the ruins, the galaxy continued to fall apart around them. The Zephyrian hive mind began expanding rapidly, consuming everything in their path. Their ships moved like a plague of locusts, stripping planets bare and leaving nothing behind. The peaceful species they encountered had no weapons or tactics to stop them. Dr. Ben Taylor woke up from medical cryosleep on a human military station to find the facility abandoned. The strategic planner had been in suspended animation for 6 months, recovering from injuries. He found emergency logs that explained the evacuation, but gave no details about the threat that had made humanity leave. Ben's training told him that no enemy could force the entire human race to evacuate without a fight. Humans were stubborn and aggressive when threatened. They would rather die defending their homes than run away. Something else was happening that the logs did not explain. He managed to repair a small scout ship and followed the signal broadcast to find Jake and the others. When Ben joined their group, the number of humans they knew about reached 43. It was a tiny number compared to the billions who had lived throughout the galaxy just months before. Lisa made another breakthrough when she connected multiple crystals together. The combined data showed a clearer picture of what the precursors had faced. The enemy was not from their dimension. It came from somewhere else entirely, using the edge of the galaxy as an entry point into normal space. The images showed the final battle of the precursor civilization. They had fought bravely but were overwhelmed by an enemy that did not follow the normal rules of physics. The warnings they left behind were meant for whoever came after them. They were trying to save future civilizations from making the same mistakes. Jake realized that humanity must have found these same warnings. The coordinates in the evacuation message pointed to the same region where the precursors had made their last stand. Humans had gone there not to run away, but to fight an enemy that threatened all life in the galaxy. The Altarian economy crashed as trade with human colonies stopped completely. Chancellor Vexthara watched her people struggle without the resources and technology they had come to depend on. The humans had been the galaxy's greatest innovators and problem solvers. Without them, progress ground to a halt. Even the hyper-intelligent cerebrals found themselves lost without human input. Their perfect logic could solve technical problems, but they could not understand the emotional needs that drove most species to fight or cooperate. Human intuition had been the bridge between pure reason and messy biological reality. Rex studied the tactical data about the current wars and shook his head in frustration. Every conflict was following patterns that humans had learned to prevent. Species were making the same mistakes over and over because they had forgotten how to work together. The peacekeepers were gone, and chaos was spreading like a disease. Ben suggested that the remaining humans try to contact other species and offer help. Even with only 43 people, they had knowledge and skills that could make a difference. But Lisa pointed out that many aliens now blamed humans for abandoning them. They might not be welcome as peacekeepers anymore. The group faced a difficult choice. They could try to follow their species beyond the galactic rim and join whatever battle was being fought there. Or they could stay and try to hold together the civilization that humanity had helped build. Either choice meant leaving behind the life they had known. As reports came in of more systems falling to war and chaos, Jake made a decision. They would continue studying the precursor warnings while also working to maintain peace in their local sector. If humanity was fighting something beyond the rim, then someone needed to protect what they had left behind. The small group of humans became the galaxy's last hope for peace, even though most species did not know they existed. They worked in secret, using their knowledge of different cultures to prevent conflicts and protect innocent lives. It was dangerous work, but they were determined to prove that the human legacy was worth preserving. 1 year had passed since humanity vanished from the galaxy, and the situation had grown worse than anyone could have imagined. Jake stood in the command center of their hidden asteroid base, watching reports flood in from across known space. Entire star systems were going silent, not because they were destroyed, but because their populations had turned on themselves in fits of paranoid madness. Dr. Sarah Kim arrived with the last group of returning humans, bringing their total number to 72. She commanded a generation ship that had been traveling for decades carrying colonists to a distant world. Her 27 crew members were shocked to find the galaxy they remembered had become a nightmare of endless war and suspicion. Sarah was a brilliant physicist who specialized in dimensional mechanics. She immediately began studying the precursor data and made connections that others had missed. The Devourers were not just from beyond the galactic rim, but from another dimension entirely. They used the edge of known space as an entry point where the barriers between realities were weakest. Lisa worked with Sarah to understand how the dimensional breach functioned. The ancient warnings described it as a wound in space itself that allowed hostile entities to seep into normal reality. The precursors had tried to seal this breach but failed because they did not understand the true nature of their enemy. Amy returned from her reconnaissance mission to the rim with devastating news. She had found the wreckage of thousands of human ships scattered across the boundary region. The battle was over and there were no signs of survivors. Humanity had fought bravely, but appeared to have lost against an enemy that barely existed in their dimension. Rex studied the tactical data from the battle site and shook his head grimly. The human fleet had been enormous by any galactic standard, but it was nothing compared to the forces they had faced. The Devourers could manifest in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making conventional weapons almost useless against them. But Amy had also found something hopeful in the debris field. Admiral Kate Sullivan's flagship, the USS Resilience, was still intact and broadcasting a continuous signal. The message was encrypted with codes that only high-ranking human officers would know. It contained crucial information about how to permanently seal the dimensional breach. Sarah decoded the Admiral's final transmission and learned the terrible truth about humanity's sacrifice. The human fleet had succeeded in pushing the Devourers back into their own dimension, but the only way to seal the breach permanently was from the other side. Humanity had chosen exile in an alien reality, rather than allow the galaxy to be consumed. Jake felt a mixture of pride and grief as he understood what his species had done. They had not fled from the galaxy but had walked willingly into another dimension, knowing they could never return. It was the ultimate act of self-sacrifice to save billions of lives they would never see again. But the battle was not over. The dimensional breach was still open and smaller Devourer entities continued to seep through. These scouts were spreading their psychological influence throughout the galaxy, turning species against each other. Without the main human fleet to hold the line, the scouts had free access to every populated system. Ben analyzed the pattern of psychological attacks and found they were getting stronger. The Krillian Empire had fractured into dozens of warring factions that fought each other instead of expanding outward. The logical cerebrals were making increasingly irrational decisions that hurt their own people. Even the peaceful Etherians had become violent and suspicious. The galaxy was destroying itself from within just as the Devourers had planned. Each act of violence and betrayal weakened the barriers that protected normal space from dimensional intrusion. The scouts were preparing the way for something much worse to come through the breach. Sarah made a breakthrough when she studied the precursor weapon systems hidden throughout the galaxy. The ancient race had built a network of dimensional stabilizers designed to reinforce the barriers between realities. The weapons were still functional, but required activation codes that only the precursors had known. Lisa discovered that the codes were hidden in the crystal databanks they had been studying for months. The precursors had left behind a complete instruction manual for fighting dimensional invaders. They had learned from their defeat and prepared future civilizations to succeed where they had failed. Commander Pete Johnson arrived with his crew from the generation ship Horizon, adding to their numbers and bringing weapons specifically designed to combat dimensional entities. Humanity had been preparing for this war longer than anyone realized. The evacuation had been planned for decades, as different human groups discovered pieces of the threat. Pete explained that certain human military units had been secretly developing anti-dimensional technology for years. They had studied every precursor site they could find, and built weapons that could affect entities existing in multiple realities. The fleet that went to the Rim had carried these experimental weapons into their final battle. Jake realized that The 72 remaining humans were more than just survivors. They were the seed group that humanity had left behind to continue the fight if the main fleet failed. Each person had been chosen for specific skills needed to activate the precursor weapon network and seal the dimensional breach permanently. The group faced their most difficult decision yet. Using the precursor weapons would save the galaxy, but it would also cut off any possibility of the main human fleet returning. They would be condemning their species to permanent exile in another dimension to protect aliens who mostly hated and feared them. Sarah began calculating the power requirements. For activating the entire precursor network, it would require enormous amounts of energy drawn from multiple star systems. The process would be visible throughout the galaxy and would certainly attract attention from the alien coalition hunting them. Amy volunteered to lead the mission to the Galactic Rim, where the main dimensional controls were located. It would be a dangerous journey through space filled with Devourer scouts and hostile alien fleets. But someone had to reach the control station and input the activation codes at precisely the right moment. Lisa argued that they should try to warn the other species about what was happening before sealing the breach. Many aliens still did not understand that their conflicts were being caused by external manipulation. They deserved to know the truth about the threat they faced. Rex disagreed, saying there was no time for explanations. The psychological attacks were getting stronger every day, and soon the galaxy would be too chaotic to organize any kind of defense. They had to act immediately while they still could coordinate their efforts. Jake made the final decision as their unofficial leader. They would activate the precursor network and seal the dimensional breach regardless of the consequences. Humanity had already sacrificed everything to protect the galaxy. The few remaining humans would complete that sacrifice by ensuring their species could never come home. The mission would require splitting their small group and taking enormous risks. But they were the last hope for billions of lives across thousands of worlds. They would succeed or die trying, just as their species had always done when facing impossible odds. 18 months after humanity departed, the galaxy reached its darkest hour. Jake stood on the bridge of Amy's exploration ship as they approached the Galactic Rim, where the dimensional breach waited like a wound in space itself. Behind them, the 72 humans had split into teams across the galaxy, preparing to activate the precursor weapon network that would save or doom them all. The journey to the rim took them through sectors that had fallen silent under Devourer influence. Entire civilizations had turned inward, consuming themselves in paranoid fury. The Krillian Empire existed only in name, as its fragments fought endless civil wars. The cerebral worlds had descended into chaos as pure logic failed against dimensional madness that followed no rational rules. Sarah worked frantically in the ship's laboratory, calibrating the activation codes they would need to seal the breach permanently. The precursor data was complex and unforgiving. One mistake in the sequence could make the dimensional wound larger instead of closing it. She had run the calculations hundreds of times, but there was no way to test them without risking everything. Rex coordinated with the other human teams scattered throughout the galaxy. Each group was responsible for activating precursor stations in their local sectors. The network had to fire simultaneously, or the dimensional barriers would collapse completely. They had one chance to get this right, and failure would doom every living being in known space. As they reached the rim, Amy's ship detected the aftermath of humanity's final battle. Debris from thousands of human vessels drifted in the void alongside twisted wreckage that should not have been able to exist in normal space. The Devourer remains flickered in and out of reality, as if they could not decide which dimension they belonged to. Lisa studied the scanner readings and felt sick at the scale of destruction. The human fleet had been massive, but the enemy had been beyond imagination. Ships the size of moons had fought against entities that existed as pure malevolent thought given form. It was a war between matter and mind, with reality itself as the battlefield. In the center of the wreckage, they found Admiral Sullivan's flagship, still broadcasting its final message. The USS Resilience was badly damaged, but its main systems remained functional. Jake led a boarding party to retrieve the Admiral's personal logs and any data that might help them understand what had happened in humanity's last moments. The ship's corridors were empty, but showed signs of a desperate final battle, Bulkheads were twisted by forces that normal physics could not explain. In some sections, the walls flickered between solid metal and transparent energy, as dimensional effects continued to warp local space. Admiral Sullivan's final log entry was, "Waiting in the command center." Her image appeared on the main screen, tired but determined, as she recorded humanity's last message to the galaxy. She explained that the human fleet had succeeded in pushing the Devourers back into their own dimension, but the cost had been enormous. The Admiral's voice was steady as she described the choice humanity had made. The only way to permanently seal the dimensional breach was to activate the precursor weapons from the other side of reality. The entire human fleet would have to cross into the Devourer dimension and fight to hold the breach closed, while the weapon network activated. Jake felt tears on his face as he realized what the message meant. Humanity had not been defeated in battle. They had won by choosing to sacrifice themselves completely. Every man, woman, and child of their species had walked into an alien dimension, knowing they could never return to the galaxy they had called home. Sarah activated the precursor control station using the codes from Admiral Sullivan's files. The ancient machinery hummed to life after millions of years of dormancy. Displays showed the status of weapon stations throughout the galaxy. Most were still functional and waiting for the final activation command. But the displays also showed something terrifying. The dimensional breach was growing larger, as more Devourer scouts pushed through from the other side. The psychological attacks on galactic civilization were intensifying as the enemy prepared for a major invasion. If they waited much longer, the breach would be too large to seal even with the precursor weapons. Amy received emergency transmissions from Chancellor Vexthara and other alien leaders who had finally realized the true nature of their crisis. The wars and conflicts that had consumed the galaxy were not natural, but the result of external manipulation. The species that had hunted humans now begged for help against an enemy they could not understand. Rex reported that his teams were ready to activate their assigned precursor stations. Ben had successfully infiltrated Krillian space and reached his target, despite the civil wars raging around him. Pete had fought through Zephyrian territory to activate the weapons that would protect the core worlds. Lisa had convinced several alien leaders to help guard the remaining stations. Jake stood before the master control panel, knowing that his next action would determine the fate of the galaxy. Activating the weapon network would seal the dimensional breach and end the Devourer threat forever. But it would also cut off any possibility of humanity returning from their exile in another dimension. He thought about Admiral Sullivan's final words. She had told him that humans went into the dark so that others could live in the light. They should be remembered not as the species that left, but as the one that chose to stay gone so the galaxy could be free. Sarah gave him the activation codes and stepped back. The decision belonged to Jake as the leader of humanity's remnant. Whatever happened next would be his responsibility and his burden to carry. He entered the sequence and watched as the precursor network came online across the galaxy. Energy beams lanced out from hidden stations on thousands of worlds. The dimensional breach began to contract as barriers between realities solidified. Devourer entities caught in normal space screamed in frequencies that made stars flicker. The psychological influence that had driven species to madness faded, like a bad dream ending. The process took hours as the ancient weapons slowly repaired the wound in space that had threatened all existence. Jake and his team watched the displays show system after system returning to normal as the Devourer influence retreated. Wars ended as species suddenly remembered how to cooperate instead of fight. When it was over, the galactic rim showed only normal space filled with stars and planets where the dimensional breach had been. The 72 humans had succeeded in completing their species' sacrifice. They had saved a galaxy that would never fully understand what had been done for them. 5 years later, Jake stood before a memorial to humanity that had been built on the site of their old embassy. Representatives from every galactic species came to pay respects to the race that had given everything to protect them. The wars had ended and cooperation had returned as the galaxy rebuilt itself using human principles of unity and sacrifice. Jake had become the director of the Terran Memorial Academy, where alien species learned about human values and history. The remaining humans were treated as living legends, but they knew the real heroes were the billions who had walked into another dimension and never returned. A transmission arrived from the Deep Space Monitoring Station, reporting a new signal from beyond the outer territories. The USS Hope was returning after a 1,000-year journey, carrying colonists who had no idea what had happened to their species. Humanity's story was not over, but beginning again, one ship at a time. The galaxy had learned to fear not because humans departed, but because they finally understood what humanity had been protecting them from all along. In choosing to stay gone, forever, humans had proven that some things were more important than survival. They had shown that love for others could overcome even the fear of eternal exile. Jake read the final entry in Admiral Sullivan's personal log as the Hope approached its new home. Her words would be remembered as long as intelligent life existed in the galaxy. Humans had gone into the dark so others could live in the light, and that light would never fade as long as people remembered their sacrifice. Captain Zethkar stared at the empty space where Earth should have been buzzing with ships and signals. His long blue fingers tapped against the control panel of his trade vessel as he tried to understand what he was seeing. 3 months ago, this system had been full of human activity. Now there was nothing but silence and cold metal floating in the dark. The Vorthan captain had come here because of a distress signal from the outer territories. Pirates were attacking trade routes and nobody seemed able to stop them. For over 100 years, when problems like this happened, everyone called the humans. They always came to help. They always found a way to make things work between different species who wanted to fight each other. But the humans were gone. Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead as he looked at the ancient stone carvings on Kepler 442b. The human archaeologist had been working at this dig site for 6 months, studying the ruins left by the precursor race. Dr. Lisa Park knelt beside him, examining samples of strange crystals they had found buried deep in the temple walls. Jake's communication device buzzed with an emergency message. The text made his blood run cold. All humans were ordered to return to Earth immediately. No exceptions, no delays. The message was encrypted with codes that Jake had never seen before. It came from the highest levels of human command. Lisa looked up from her work when she saw Jake's face go pale. She was a xenobiologist who had spent years studying how different alien species lived and worked together. Her research on this remote planet was supposed to last another 2 years. The evacuation ships had already left by the time Jake and Lisa reached their communication station. Their small research vessel could not make the journey to Earth fast enough. They watched the last human transport disappear into hyperspace and knew they had been left behind. On the Galactic Council station orbiting the twin stars of Alpha Centauri, Chancellor Vexthara called an emergency meeting. The tall, elegant leader of the Altarian Federation had served on the council for 40 years. She had never seen anything like this before. Every species represented on the council was asking the same question. Where were the humans? The Krillian Empire delegate was already making threats. Without humans to keep them in check, the warrior race was ready to expand their territory. They had been waiting for this chance for decades. The peaceful Etherian collective was sending urgent messages to their homeworlds telling them to prepare their defenses. Vexthara tried to keep order, but she could see the fear in every alien face around the council table. The humans had become the backbone of galactic civilization. They were the ones who solved disputes between species. They were the ones who kept the peace when old enemies wanted to fight. They were the ones who had the strange ability to understand both logic and emotion at the same time. Now they were gone and nobody knew why. On the research station orbiting Jupiter, automated systems continued to broadcast the same message over and over. Any ship that came close to Earth's solar system received the transmission. It was brief and gave no real answers. The humans had found something beyond the galactic rim. They had to investigate. They were sorry for leaving without explanation, but there was no time. The message included coordinates to a region of space that every galactic map marked as uninhabitable. Sensors showed nothing there but radiation and dead stars. No species had ever tried to explore that area because it seemed pointless and dangerous. Jake and Lisa decided to stay on their research planet rather than try to find other humans. Their supplies could last for months, and they had important work to finish. The precursor ruins were full of mysteries that might explain what had happened to the galaxy's most advanced ancient civilization. As they dug deeper into the temple, they found more strange writings and symbols. Some of the carvings seemed to show battles between different groups. Others showed images of creatures that did not look like any known species. The crystals they found seemed to store information, but they could not figure out how to access it. Captain Zethkar sent messages to every human colony and outpost he could find. All of them were empty. The humans had not just left Earth. They had abandoned every settlement, every station, and every research post throughout the galaxy. It was as if the entire species had vanished overnight. Other species began to panic as news of the human departure spread. Trade routes that humans had protected became targets for pirates and raiders. Diplomatic agreements that humans had negotiated started to fall apart. Wars that humans had ended began to restart. The Bruton warrior caste found themselves without worthy opponents to fight. They had respected humans as the only species that could match their combat skills. Now they turned their weapons on each other in bloody civil wars. The cerebrals who relied on pure logic to make decisions discovered they needed human intuition to understand the emotional needs of other species. Lisa made a breakthrough when she connected one of the precursor crystals to her scanner. Images flashed across the screen showing what looked like warnings. The symbols seemed to point toward the edge of the galaxy, the same edge where the humans had gone. Jake realized that the humans might have found something in these ruins that made them leave. The precursors had disappeared millions of years ago, leaving behind only empty cities and cryptic warnings. What if they had faced the same threat that was now approaching the galaxy? As the third month without humans came to an end, Zethkar received reports of 3 separate wars breaking out in different sectors. The Krillian Empire had invaded the Scythian territories. The Zephyrian hive mind was consuming outer colonies. Pirate fleets were running wild through space lanes that had been safe for generations. The galaxy was falling apart without its peacekeepers, and nobody knew if the humans would ever come back. In the ruins on Kepler 442b, Jake and Lisa worked frantically to decode more precursor warnings. They had a feeling that understanding the ancient messages might be the key to saving everyone. The silence where human voices should have been grew louder every day.